The forest was silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. A small band of early humans huddled together, their eyes scanning the darkness, wary of predators lurking nearby. Suddenly, crack, a lightning bolt split the sky. A tree not far away burst into flames. At first, fear overwhelmed them. They had never seen anything so bright, so alive, yet so dangerous. The fire roared, swallowing branches and sending sparks into the night. Some of them shrieked, clutching one another, ready to flee. But then, hesitation crept in. Despite their fear, they couldn't look away. Over the following days, this band cautiously approached the scorched ground. The air smelled strange, acrid, but the animals had fled. The once dangerous tree had become a source of both fear and fascination. This was the first encounter between humankind and fire. From a scientific perspective, archaeologists believe that early humans first encountered fire in just this way, through natural phenomena such as lightning strikes, volcanic eruptions, or wildfires. Evidence from ancient caves suggests that fire was present in the lives of our ancestors nearly 1 million years ago, though at first, they didn't know how to control it. For these early people, fire was both a blessing and a curse. It scared off predators but could easily consume the forest around them. It was an uncontrollable force, one they could only observe from a distance. Yet, this first moment, those frightened yet curious eyes watching flames dance in the night, marked the beginning of a relationship that would change the destiny of humankind. In hindsight, modern science recognizes this as a turning point. The ability to harness fire would not only provide warmth and safety but eventually transform diets, shape social structures, and fuel the growth of human civilization. But in that very first encounter, it was nothing more than a mysterious, terrifying miracle in the dark. The storm had passed, but the memory of the burning tree lingered. A few brave individuals from the band decided to return to the site. Among the blackened branches, they found glowing embers still smoldering. They hesitated, then reached out with a long stick to touch the fiery core. To their astonishment, the stick caught fire at the tip. At first, they panicked, dropping the burning stick. But then, curiosity prevailed. Slowly, cautiously, they tried again, this time holding it longer, waving it in the air, marveling at how the flame danced without consuming them immediately. For the first time, fire was in their hands. This moment, though fragile and accidental, represented the dawn of something revolutionary. Modern science suggests that early humans didn't invent fire instantly, they first borrowed it from nature. Archaeological evidence shows traces of controlled fire in caves dating back hundreds of thousands of years, indicating that our ancestors learned to keep and transport natural flames before they could create them themselves. For the band, the burning stick was both a tool and a symbol. It lit their way through the night, keeping the shadows at bay. Predators, once bold, now hesitated before the glowing weapon. Fire gave them a power they had never possessed before, a mobile sun, carried in their own hands. Anthropologists emphasize that this ability to carry and preserve fire was as important as eventually learning how to create it. Fire became not just a fleeting miracle but a resource to be guarded and shared. It was fragile, easily lost, yet precious enough to inspire cooperation and responsibility within the group. In that brief moment, holding a burning stick, humankind crossed an invisible boundary. They were no longer merely observers of nature's fury, they had taken the first step toward mastering it. And from that point forward, the path of humanity would never be the same. Night fell, and the small band gathered inside a rocky shelter. Outside, the forest buzzed with unseen threats, growls, rustling, the heavy silence of predators on the prowl. But inside, for the first time, they had something new, a small, flickering fire. Its glow painted the walls in shades of orange, its warmth pushed away the biting cold. The group huddled close. Children stared wide-eyed at the dancing flames, while adults sat in cautious silence, as if fearing the fire might vanish at any moment. The flame sputtered, sometimes shrinking, sometimes flaring, but always alive. And with every breath of heat, it planted a new thought in their minds: what if this fire could stay with us forever? At first, they didn't know how to care for it. A few tossed damp leaves on the flames, causing thick smoke that stung their eyes. Others experimented with twigs, then heavier branches, learning by trial and error that dry wood kept the fire burning stronger and longer. Slowly, almost instinctively, the group developed the earliest knowledge of fire maintenance, an unspoken science born out of necessity. Modern anthropology tells us that this stage, learning to preserve fire, was one of humanity's first collective responsibilities. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was fragile. Left unattended, it would die. This meant that survival depended not on one individual's strength, but on the group's ability to cooperate and guard the flame together. As the night deepened, something unexpected happened. With the fire burning steadily, the group no longer curled up in restless fear. They relaxed. They began to communicate, not with words as we know them, but with gestures, murmurs, and shared glances. Around the fire, humans found their first real space for social bonding. Anthropologists argue that the campfire may have been the birthplace of culture itself. It offered time and safety for conversation, teaching, and storytelling. Some scholars even suggest that language evolved, in part, because humans gathered around fires at night, sharing experiences that went beyond the immediate needs of survival. Back in that ancient shelter, the group didn't know they were making history. They only knew that the fire was precious, and that losing it would plunge them back into the terror of the dark. So, they kept watch. One by one, they fed the flames, eyes heavy with sleep but unwilling to let the glow fade. By dawn, the fire was still alive. Ashes glowed red, smoke curled lazily into the air, and relief washed over them. For the first time, they had carried the fire across the long, dangerous night. It was a small victory, almost invisible in the vast sweep of evolution. Yet in that fragile ember, guarded through the hours of darkness, lay the promise of everything to come: security, society, and the first spark of civilization. Morning came, but the fire still glowed faintly in the heart of the ashes. The group gathered, marveling at the miracle that the flame had survived the night. A few carefully added dry twigs, blowing gently until the ember flared again into flame. For the first time in their existence, dawn arrived not with fear and cold, but with warmth and light that they themselves had carried into a new day. That day, life began to change. Instead of wandering immediately in search of food, they lingered by the fire. Some roasted roots and tubers in the embers, discovering that the bitter taste softened into sweetness when touched by flame. Others waved their burning sticks at animals that dared to approach, and were astonished to see predators retreat. Fire was no longer just a fleeting wonder, it was becoming part of daily life. Archaeologists believe that this was the point where fire became central to human settlement. Sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years show blackened hearths at the center of caves, evidence that fire was not merely borrowed but kept and used day after day. The hearth, simple as it seems, was humanity's first center of community life. Around the fire, roles began to shift. Some were tasked with gathering dry wood, others with watching the flame, while hunters planned their next outing in its glow. In this simple act of division, anthropologists see the beginnings of social organization. Fire demanded cooperation, and in return, it offered safety, warmth, and more reliable food. That evening, after their first day living with fire, the group gathered again as shadows lengthened. They sat in a circle, faces glowing in the orange light, their voices soft but animated. They gestured toward the flames, toward each other, toward the dark beyond. A rhythm was forming, a nightly ritual of returning, gathering, and sharing. Modern science suggests that such gatherings were crucial to the development of memory and storytelling. Around the fire, humans could replay the events of the hunt, teach the young, and slowly shape the first myths and collective knowledge. The hearth was not only a source of energy but a cradle of culture. That first day may have seemed ordinary to them, a day spent near warmth instead of wandering in cold. But in hindsight, it was extraordinary. For when humans learned to center their lives around fire, they were not just surviving another day, they were laying the foundations for community, cooperation, and culture itself. The ember in the ashes had survived the night, and with it, something new had ignited in human history. Days turned into weeks, and the fire was no longer just a source of warmth, it became a weapon. The hunters of the band began to realize that flames could do more than scare predators, they could also control prey. One morning, as they tracked a herd of animals across the plains, an idea sparked. Instead of rushing headlong with only spears and stones, they lit branches and waved them at the animals. The herd panicked, scattering, but not in every direction. The hunters discovered they could use fire to steer the animals, driving them toward cliffs or into natural enclosures where the kill was easier. For the first time, fire wasn't just a passive tool for survival, it became a partner in strategy. Archaeological evidence supports this idea. Charred remains of grasslands, dating back tens of thousands of years, suggest that early humans practiced fire drives, using controlled burns to flush animals from hiding or herd them into traps. This technique was a precursor to later hunting strategies and showed a growing ability to manipulate the environment. For the band, the results were immediate. The hunt became less dangerous, with fewer hunters injured in desperate chases. The yield increased, meaning more food to share. Around the fire that night, they roasted the meat, discovering once again that cooked flesh was softer, tastier, and easier to chew. Children gnawed happily on pieces they could never have eaten raw. Scientists today believe that this shift, using fire not just for defense, but for food production, was critical. With more reliable access to calories, the group could support more members, spend less energy on constant foraging, and free time for new forms of cooperation and creativity. Fire was, in essence, a multiplier of human energy. That evening, as the hunters recounted their success through gestures and cries around the hearth, the group celebrated not just the meal but the method. The fire that once frightened them was now a tool for shaping the hunt itself. And in mastering this, they had taken another step toward mastering the world. Unknowingly, they had crossed into a new stage of human history, no longer mere opportunists living at nature's mercy, but strategists, using fire to bend nature to their will. The fire was now the heart of the band's life. By day, they hunted and foraged, by night, they gathered around the glowing embers. But then came an accident that changed everything. One evening, after a successful hunt, scraps of meat and bone fell too close to the flames. At first, panic set in, they feared the fire would consume their precious food. Yet instead of vanishing, the meat began to hiss and release a strange, enticing aroma. A curious child reached out, blew on the hot piece, and cautiously bit. His face twisted from the heat, then lit up with delight. The meat was softer, tastier, and easier to swallow. Others hesitated, then tried for themselves. Piece by piece, they discovered the same miracle: the fire didn't ruin the food, it transformed it. Modern science calls this the cooking hypothesis, championed by anthropologist Richard Wrangham. According to this theory, cooking was a turning point in human evolution. Heat broke down fibers in meat and plants, making food easier to chew and digest, while unlocking more calories. With less energy spent on digestion, more could fuel the most demanding organ of all, the human brain. In other words, fire fed our intelligence. Back in the band, meals quickly took on a new rhythm. They learned to lay meat on hot stones, to skewer it on sticks and hold it near the flames. At first, they burned or dropped much of it, but gradually they grew more skilled. Fire was no longer just a source of protection, it was a partner in nourishment. The change rippled through their lives. With easier meals, they spent less time gnawing raw food and more time resting, sharing, and communicating. Around the fire, gestures and sounds became more complex, laying the groundwork for the birth of language itself. Anthropologists argue that this was one of the deepest effects of cooking, not just in biology, but in culture. Cooked meals encouraged people to gather, to linger, to talk. From the first shared bites of roasted meat, the human story of community and conversation began. What started as an accident, a scrap of meat falling into fire, was in fact a revolution. From then on, the flame didn't just warm their bodies or frighten beasts. It shaped their food, their minds, and ultimately, the path of civilization. By now, the fire had become the lifeblood of the band. It gave them warmth, food, and safety. But that also meant one thing: if the fire went out, disaster would strike. One stormy night, rain poured into their shelter. The flames hissed, sputtered, and finally died. Darkness rushed in, swallowing the cave. Children cried, adults huddled in fear. The next day, they had no choice but to risk a dangerous journey back to the forest where lightning had once struck, hoping to find embers again. From this fear, a new awareness emerged: the fire must never be left alone. The band began to assign watchers. Strong hunters, quick-footed youths, they took turns sitting near the flames. Their job was simple, but crucial: feed the fire when it grew weak, shield it from wind and rain. Anthropologists believe this moment marked a turning point in human society. Guarding the fire was one of the first true collective responsibilities. It wasn't just about individual survival anymore, it was about protecting something for the good of all. In watching over fire, humans began to practice discipline, cooperation, and shared duty. The task also reshaped their nights. Before, darkness meant sleep and silence. But now, some stayed awake while others rested. The rhythm of human life shifted. This was, in essence, the birth of shifts, an early division of time and labor that echoed through all future civilizations. In the band's story, the fire was placed at the cave's entrance, encircled by stones. Children were forbidden to come too close. Elders performed small rituals each morning, tossing dry twigs into the flames as if speaking to a spirit within. Fire had become more than a tool. It was the heart of the community. Science today recognizes the significance of this. To preserve fire was to control a natural force over time, something no other species had done. In tending the flame, humans were taking their first steps toward mastering the environment itself. That night, as the flames danced steadily under careful watch, the band no longer feared the dark in the same way. They had learned a new truth: survival meant not just fighting nature, but nurturing it. And in the embers' glow, human society began to take shape. Over time, the flame was no longer seen only as a tool for survival. Something about its glow, its ceaseless dance, stirred feelings of awe and mystery. The band began to treat fire not just as a companion, but as a presence, something alive. On certain nights, when the hunt was successful, they offered scraps of meat to the fire, watching as it sizzled and vanished in smoke. Children pointed, wide-eyed, as if the fire were eating alongside them. Elders raised their hands to the glow, muttering sounds that carried both gratitude and fear. Slowly, rituals were born. Anthropologists suggest that the hearth was humanity's first altar. Fire gave more than warmth and food, it gave rhythm to daily life, and in that rhythm, humans found meaning. The act of feeding fire, protecting it, or gathering around it may have been the earliest form of ceremony, a practice that bound the group together in shared emotion and belief. Science provides further insight. Psychologists argue that staring into fire's shifting light can induce a calm, meditative state, lowering stress and fostering social bonding. Perhaps this is why, even today, people feel drawn to campfires, candles, or fireplaces. In the deep past, this hypnotic power may have opened the door to imagination, myth, and spirituality. In the band's story, the rituals grew. Before a hunt, they circled the fire, raising spears and stamping feet, as if asking the flames for strength. When someone fell ill, they waved smoke over the body, hoping the spirit of fire would chase sickness away. Births, deaths, and victories, each began to be marked with flame. This transformation was profound. Fire was no longer just a force of nature under human control. It had become a symbol, a bridge between the known and the unknown. In the fire's light, humanity began its first steps toward religion, art, and myth. That night, as sparks rose into the dark sky, the band did not see them as random embers. They saw them as messengers, carrying prayers into the heavens. The hearth was no longer just survival, it was the dawn of belief. With fire at their side, the band dared to travel farther than ever before. No longer bound to warm valleys or daylight hours, they carried glowing embers in wooden husks or bundles of bark, ensuring the flame moved with them wherever they went. Each new place they entered became safer, warmer, more habitable, because they could bring their own sun into the night. Archaeological evidence supports this transformation. Charred hearths and ash layers found deep in caves across Africa, Europe, and Asia suggest that fire allowed humans to push into colder regions they could never have endured otherwise. By taming flame, our ancestors expanded their range, setting the stage for the Great Migration that carried humanity across continents. The impact was enormous. Fire made caves livable in icy winters. It allowed hunters to stalk prey in harsher climates. It kept predators at bay, letting families sleep with fewer fears. And with cooked food, humans extracted more energy, fueling longer journeys. Fire wasn't just a tool anymore, it was the key to mobility and survival. In the story of the band, this expansion began when game grew scarce near their old home. Guided by instinct and need, they ventured northward into colder forests. Each night, they built a circle of stones, fed their flame, and huddled close. Without fire, the biting winds would have driven them back. With it, they could stay, explore, and eventually thrive. Anthropologists view this as a decisive evolutionary leap. The ability to carry fire gave humans an edge over every other species. Where other animals were tied to specific habitats, humans could adapt. Fire became a universal tool, transforming wilderness into home. That night, as the band gazed into the flames, they no longer saw it as just protection or ritual. The fire had become something more profound, a promise of the future. With fire, no place was too dark, no night too long, no land beyond reach. The stage was set for the next great chapter in human history. Soon, fire would not only travel with them, it would ignite discoveries that forever changed the destiny of humankind. For many generations, fire was borrowed, carried, and guarded. Yet there remained a terrifying truth: if the flame ever died, the band was helpless until lightning struck again. The fire was theirs, but not truly theirs. They had learned to keep it, but not yet to make it. Then came a moment of discovery. One day, while striking stones to sharpen a spear tip, a hunter saw sparks leap into dry grass. At first it startled him, then it ignited a thought: what if fire could be summoned at will? Others began experimenting, striking flints against each other, watching for sparks. In time, they learned the delicate balance: sparks into tinder, breath into ember, ember into flame. For the first time, humanity was no longer a borrower of fire, but its creator. Archaeological evidence suggests this mastery came late, perhaps only within the last few 100,000 years. Before that, humans depended on natural sources of flame. But once the secret of ignition was found, whether through stone, friction, or both, it changed everything. Fire was no longer an accident or a gift. It was technology. For the band, the moment was nothing short of magic. They no longer feared storms that might extinguish the hearth. No longer did they wander desperately in search of lightning's remnants. Instead, a simple act of stone and spark placed power directly in their hands. The flame that once seemed divine now answered to human will. Scientists view this as one of the greatest thresholds in history. With the ability to create fire, humans crossed into true mastery of energy. From this seed grew metallurgy, ceramics, farming, engines, and every future leap of civilization. In essence, the discovery of how to make fire was the first spark of all later technology. That night, when the first intentionally lit fire blazed, the band gathered in awe. They fed it, danced around it, raised their voices in cries that were part fear, part triumph. For they knew, without words, that something fundamental had changed. The fire was no longer just a companion of survival. It was the birthright of humanity. And so, with the secret of fire's birth in their hands, humankind stepped into a new dawn. The flame was theirs to keep, to carry, and to create, an eternal symbol of the human spirit's power to transform the world.